Welcome to the After 406 podcast, where we cut through the noise and get real. The vote of no confidence has had the whole country buzzing. Memes, rumors, hot takes everywhere. But here's the kicker. James Marape still came on top. Why? What is it about this guy that has 89 MPs in his corner? Today, I'm unpacking the 4 pillars behind staying in power: tribe, faith, ideology, and branding. If you want to understand PNG politics without the fluff, you're in the right place. Let's cut through it. As expected, the WhatsApp groups and other social media platforms were buzzing on predictions, allegiances, and the hopes and aspirations of who would be the Prime Minister a couple of months ago. And in that leadership tussle, fascinating reading, ranging from comical to serious discourses. At the end of the day, 10 a.m. in the morning, 89 members of Parliament voted to retain the Prime Ministership of James Marape, accounting for a little over a two-third majority. The central question that everyone has been asking, why is there so much appeal for James Marape's leadership? To unpack this question, I'm delighted to welcome two young and somewhat distinguished professionals that have worked in the world of PNG politics. Martyn Namorong is a public intellectual and political commentator who most recently worked as the communications advisor to the Treasurer. He has held roles in the private sector and civil society, including Octedi Mining Limited, PNG Sustainable Development Program, MTV, Institute of National Affairs, and the Consultative Implementation and Monitoring Committee. He won one journalism award from UNDP in 2012 and PNG's National Literary Award in 2011. In 2016, the Divine Word University recognized his work in media and journalism by awarding him an Excellence in Media Award. Between 2016 and 2019, he was the national coordinator for the PNG Resource Governance Coalition, promoting transparency in the extractive industries and dialogue between government, communities, mining, and oil and gas companies. Martyn is passionate about development in PNG, particularly in understanding its political economy and bridging the gap between the margins and centers of power. We're also joined by Thiery Lepani. He's a political journalist and communication specialist with heritage from Milne Bay and Central. He has extensive experience covering PNG political scene. Thierry worked at the Post-Courier as a political journalist alongside local and international media professionals. He specializes in investigative reports and advocates for development in PNG's media industry. Thierry recently graduated from the University of Canberra with bachelor's in international relations and politics and a bachelor's in media and communication. He has also worked at ABC's Pacific Beat radio program and recently served as press secretary for the office of the Leader of the Opposition under Douglas Tumaresia. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, James Marape's brand. Gentlemen, Martyn, you've had a clear view on the man and the mojo that he possesses. So give us a sense of what his leadership style is and probably lead us into his policy priorities.
Yeah, I think, when people think about our politicians, they obviously have put them on a pedestal. So they look and they perceive politicians as being in some sort of rarefied air that they came out from heaven or something. The reality with our political leaders is they are products of our society. Many of them were once living very ordinary lives like every other Papua New Guinean, and their own peers, people in society, saw that they had potential and put them on the pedestal. So you can draw in terms of leadership, you can draw parallels between what happens in your traditional village society, in modern society, modern Papua New Guinea society, how people look at leaders, how people congregate around leaders, and similarities happen within the political circle as well. Obviously, most people like very simple answers to these sort of questions, and the most simple answer that people like to say is, "Oh, someone's bribed everybody off," and you know, but in real life, even money cannot solve all problems.
Mhm.
So I would say, first and foremost, just as in our local societies, it's really about personality. If someone is likable, if someone is seen as being reliable, people tend to congregate around those people. And at the national leadership, you really have to manage a lot of that in terms of when you make promises, keep them, being reliable. Uh, are you someone that people feel comfortable talking to? I think Prime Minister Marape has a very likable personality amongst his peers, and they probably find him very approachable. Not someone that you're gonna fear to approach, or you need to come crawling on your knees in reverence of. So it's not to say that people just treat him like someone ordinary, but it's to say that if he's not approachable, I don't think a lot of leaders will congregate. So I've had comments among leaders describing some of their peers as being white men.
Mhm.
So obviously they are not going to be congregating about people they perceive to be white men.
So just unpack us what that white man feature is.
Well, I think for the lay Papua New Guinean, I would describe it as a group of just Papua New Guinea,
Sure.
very very masculine, maybe toxic masculine culture. One of the boys that you can get along with, and even amongst the boys there is a pecking order, and people tend to congregate among someone whom they think is going to take care of their interests, lead them. You need to go for a fist fight. There's the person who's going to go in front and stand there and not going to back down. So in managing politics, it's a day-to-day activity because people are coming hour by hour, minute by minute with all sorts of demands or issues that need to be addressed, and you have to have time to give to people. I think the Prime Minister is very good at handling that side of things, and it's not something that everyone can be able to do. You really have to also have a lot of patience, and that's because everyone's coming with different perspectives on issues, and for someone to be up at the top, you have to have the patience to accommodate views that come totally out of left field. And especially when you look at how traditional leaders try to handle conflict resolution at the village level, the level of patience that they have in being able to listen to people, sometimes you just have to listen to someone scream their head out at you, say every swearing word from A to Z. After they finish, then you ask them if they're satisfied. And you'll notice generally that people would, once they calm down, they start apologizing and saying, "Oh, they did not actually mean what they said."
Gotta get it out. Get it out.
So you gotta have to have that patience, because PNG politics is not ideologically driven. So obviously, you're all sitting in the same side of whichever floor of parliament, and you're not ideologically aligned necessarily.
Mm.
And so different people will come with different, points of view, and you have to have the patience to accommodate them. I think if you don't have the patience and you have this mentality that because you're the leader, it's either your way or the highway, you know, you're not going to bring people along with you in the PNG context. And I think that's I think a real big point of difference for the Prime Minister in terms of being able to have the patience to accommodate the views of his colleagues.
So Thierry, I just I guess to pivot to you and your work with the opposition leader. So is it the case that PM Marape has perfected these skills that Martyn talked about in managing a political system over charisma and ideological policy?
Yeah, I think he's perfected the skill because, to his credit, he has defeated a number of votes of no confidence and political infighting way back in as early as 2020, when the first challenge to his prime ministership began. I've heard the same thing, that he's quite a approachable person, and I think when you put it in the context of those who had come away from the Peter O'Neill era when he was accused of being too isolated with people that surrounded him, you'd have to speak to them before you could speak to him. So I do hear the same thing that Martyn mentioned, that the Prime Minister is a more approachable figure and has more of a easygoing personality, that he is someone that you can have an ease of access to raise grievances or discuss issues that you may have. So to his benefit, I think, that's how he tackles so many of the political issues and infighting that's come about in the last 6 years. And as I've mentioned before we started recording, it's 3 days until he celebrates his 6th year in office on May 31st. So it is he's at a crossroads in his tenure, because he's now the 3rd longest serving prime minister, but another 2 more years he will match the tenure of Peter O'Neill. So I think it's also a mixed milestone for him, because if he does reach the 8-year mark, that's a very equal pedestal to measure against Peter O'Neill, because they've had the same time period to serve. But yes, in recent times, especially in the last year, with the votes of no confidence, the nomination of Alan Bird, the nomination of Rainbow Paita, and then finally with Peter Ipatas, he's had more opportunities to manage those instances, I would say, and obviously experience is the best teacher, so he does know who to be more worried about within his coalition. He knows who to be more relaxed and trusting of their partnerships. So that time period of 2019 to now 2025, it's probably given him a lot of insight that other prime ministers probably didn't have until it was too late. And so, yeah.
Yeah, look again, as a casual observer, watching, what's happening there, and both of you have been inside. So the big takeaway from hearing from both of you is relationships matter, um, and obviously within those relationships, there's a priority platinum card listing and a bronze listing, and then you're not in the membership
Yeah.
of the club. Probably just wrap this this dialogue on the Marape brand. How does one get the Marape Platinum, and how does one get the Marape Bronze? And obviously, you're not in the club if you're in the opposition. But probably it's a question to you, Martyn. What makes one particular MP higher up compared to the other? And if I can just preface that question by giving some big picture identity on Marape. He's obviously a huge social conservative. He loves his Christian identity, and it's not just an SDA bubble. He loves Christianity. Period. So there is that sort of clique that other Christians in the house can join the club, so to speak. And I remember him telling me in a conversation with other eminent colleagues that Christianity is what unites the country, and he's almost perfected that unification model on Christian politics. The second thing that he has, and this is more ideological than the relationship side. He loves big government. I mean, this guy is a student of wanting to acquire more ministries, record budgets, more public servants, and made Waigani into the epicenter of power. So just on those two sorts of big issues, wanted to get some perspective from you on them.
Well, I don't think the Marape Platinum card or bronze card or gold card, whatever, is a secret. I think it's a product of politics that's always been there.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, to be prime minister, it's a numbers game. You need the numbers, and whether you're platinum, gold, depends on how many numbers you're bringing to the table. Right? This is not unique to PMRF. It's just a creature of PNG politics, which has always had coalition governments. So you have your ranking of coalition partners. I think that's very straightforward. After that, obviously, comes who helps to keep the government together. Yeah. And those become the key players, because they're the ones who assist the prime minister to hold a government together.
So tell me who now has a platinum card.
I'm not really sure. I mean,
Duma, with these numbers? If we use your...
There's one person with a platinum card, that's my point. I think, there are senior government leaders whom you could see as, meaning coalition party leaders.
With the numbers?
With the numbers that
Okay.
you would classify as platinum. And then depending on, the other numbers, then people come, obviously. But I don't think you could say that one person is significant, in terms of, there's this one person with a platinum card.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of players there. Definitely the senior coalition partners, you would classify the leaders as platinum card holders in terms of where they stand, where their opinions matter on policy or on the direction of things. And I'm not sure. Even if someone doesn't have a 3-party members or 4 or 5 to contribute to the coalition, I think if they are assisting the prime minister to help to maintain government, I think they would be even up at that level of recognition. I don't think it's a secret within government of who is more seniority than the others, and I don't think it's unique to this government because it's a product of the history of government formations, history of vote of no confidence and staying in power. I think what we have today is a product of our political experience in terms of seniority of cabinet members or members of a coalition government. And in terms of the view that the PM has a big government perspective, I think you have to look at his vision of where the statements that he's making. Like for instance, he wants a 200 billion Kina economy by I think 2034, 35.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to have the private sector driving that, obviously the government has to drive the GDP numbers if you want that level of economic growth to reach those sort of numbers. And obviously, what does that mean? That means fiscal expansion, your big budgets, your record budgets. So the budget's going to drive the economic numbers to reach those sort of targets. And so you look at what the big picture statement is, which is we're heading for a certain target in the size of the economy. Where is the growth going to come from? Obviously, fiscal expansion. It's going to come from growing the budget. It's going to come from growing the government. To get that kind of target that you set yourself. I think that's quite straightforward in terms of how they connect to each other. The Prime Minister set a target. He wants a 200 billion Kina economy by the mid-30s. How is he going to achieve that? By having a big government.
No, I think that's a really good perspective on the topic of big government. And yes, the Prime Minister is someone that in the last couple of years has facilitated this reliance on bureaucracy, but in a sense that it's quite it doesn't match the direction that the country needs to go. The creation of new ministries somewhat still needs to be fully justified in some senses, and how it has a return on creating and disassociating from other ministries, new positions in government systems, new electorates, the potential for splitting of provinces. All of those have to do with a reliance on we'll come back to a reliance on Waigani as a system. And in that sense, the spending is what will it will reach that target of 200 billion, but it will come with a lot of costs involved. So that's the concern that I think he hasn't really fully thought out in the short term of things.
Just to dive into the policy debate, because we're leaning into that.
Yeah.
Again, just from my observation, he's big government, big economy, 200 billion Kina objective. In classical political theory, this sits on the left side. It's got all the definitions of what a a center-left, big government socialist program looks like. 2,000 agencies, it's a large cabinet, tens of billions of kina, and every year they talk about record budget. So we're probably going to have a record one, come November. What I find fascinating is, and again, this is, I think this is something new that he's brought into the discourse that didn't exist in previous prime ministers. He's brought this socially conservative, Christendom into leadership. Like it's okay. Samara had the Catholicism construct. Chan had the same as well, but he's in some cases mechanized it to a point where we are seeing the emergence of a Christian class of politics that I haven't seen fairly organized. So again, if we look at classical political theory, and probably just on that front, he's passed the Constitutional Declaration of Christian country, and he's actively supported faith movements across. Even when he went and opened the embassy in Jerusalem, there were a lot of iconographies and messaging about Christendom in the motivation of Jerusalem. And then geopolitically, he's remained fairly solid in the West. So that whole Judeo-Christian sort of thing, he's kind of amplifying that out in that space. Although, and so firmly, security dogma stays within the West, and China has remained quite open on the economic side, which is quite typical of many leaders in the Pacific that have adopted this. But the larger sort of question that I kind of observe when I see him as this policy prime minister as opposed to the political prime minister we spoke previously, it's an oxymoron. You've got a PM that has this natural tendency of socialism, big government, communalism, which is, by the way, atheistic in its nature. And then you have this deeply religious side of his beliefs. And the reason why there is tension, I think, in this is religion by its own account is a largely individualistic, subjective type of movement. And then you've got this economic communalism that's sitting on the other side. So I just want to dive into, is this a mechanism that, Martyn, going back to your point, that he's hearing anyone, he's managing the relationship using these two devices, or is this a natural context of Papua New Guinea politics that you're deeply Christian and you're deeply socialist?
Yeah, I think, going back to what we said earlier about, PNG politics is not ideologically driven. I think it's a lot of pragmatism here.
Picking and choosing.
And one of the things about the big government as well that, is overlooked a lot is the government's actually grown the capital budget a lot. So compared to previous Papua New Guinea government, the capital budget is around half of national budget, whereas previously the budgets were mainly dominated by wages and salaries, goods and services expenditure, and nothing really on development. So you have your increase in your PIP spending, your DSIPs, PSIPs. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy about Connect PNG, but you have increase capital expenditure on the infrastructure projects. So that, when this government came into power, the capital budget was about 4 billion kina in a 16 billion kina budget or so. Now it's around almost half. It's a 10 billion kina capital budget in a 27, 28 billion kina budget. So they've been, if you want to see the government's thinking in terms of big government and the economic sector, you look at how much money is going into the capital budget. But on your point about all these things that seem seemingly contradictory, that somehow make sense, I think it's just the nature, as I said when I was talking about leadership, and we look at society. There's a lot of we seem to square the circle a lot in this country in some strange way, and this is why, while the West is finding it difficult to handle Trump, for some of us observers in Papua New Guinea, Trump doesn't seem out of order to us because what seems contradictory to the West is not necessarily contradictory to us. A PNG society holds, for better or worse, to its Christian, I would say, culture, the culture of Christianity. Because, when you look at reality, a lot of our behavior is very unchristian. But culturally, at least we seem to identify ourselves as Christians. So I would say we are cultural Christians. It would be nice if we lived out the life that Jesus wanted us to. But you say something negative about the church and you'll see a tribal fight almost happening. The famous Adventist versus Catholic disputes that happen in this country. So the Prime Minister obviously is receptive to society, and his behavior and his articulation at the national level of Christianity is basically responding to what society sort of identifies itself as. If you want to look at where all of this Christian movement comes from, don't necessarily look down at the average community level. It actually comes out of all of these student associations at universities. There's Adventist Students Association, the
Christian
tertiary
Professionals Network.
students. Out of this Christian Student Association come the Papua New Guinean elite, basically. So it's no mistake we're seeing all of these. Where does the influence come from? It's not policy driven by your local church necessarily down there. The Papua New Guinean elite who come through these student associations at university get into prominent positions and are able to influence this sort of policy. That's where I see, I might be wrong, but that's my perspective of what is driving all of it. It's coming out through the university Christian unions. Then they're all friends and they know each other once they're in public service in the private sector. And they're all talking about the things they believed in as, Christian students, where the country should go. That, I think, is more significant in influencing the constitutional amendments and whether the King James Bible sits in the parliament than some local church pastor. The Papua very strong Christian. A lot of them, because of their positions as FAS or secretary or whatever within a government institution, the leaders in private sector or government, they also end up becoming leaders at the churches around Port Moresby. The elders of your churches here in Port Moresby, most of them would be senior public servant, senior private sector people. So you got to understand where this sort of thing is being driven from. It's driven from the very strong Christian
Elite.
Papua New Guinean elite. Yeah. And these are people obviously would be most likely in the same close circles as the Prime Minister. And naturally, because it's much easier to formulate a policy or stance or foreign policy stance from that elite level with those kind of elite circles. So that's where I think what's driving this Christian narrative at least at the national level. Yeah. I mean, when this country was formed, the CPC went out, talked to the grassroots people. When the constitution was formulated, we did not have this sort of very strong fundamentalist Christian view that we have right now, because that's not the grassroots point of view.
Yeah, I think what Martyn's saying is it has value because, I mean, I remember a major point of discussion was how the heads of the three arms of government were all from a particular congregation, denomination of the church. And I think one thing the Prime Minister has done has intertwined religion, Christianity, and government and in bureaucracy and all the different sectors. I think you talked about Somare and Chan. I think prior to them and during their time, there was always that understanding that these two entities were separate. But over time, and especially in the tenure of James Marape, how it started with his manifesto, which is the only thing we have to understand his own idea of what he envisions Papua New Guinea, and that was making it the richest Black Christian nation on earth. And I think that gave rise to this association of Christianity and government. That because that was the tagline for the Prime Minister, that is like a call to action for the people that Martyn is talking about within various sectors of government. That is, the Prime Minister has already given the directive that we have to be the richest Black Christian nation. So what do we have to do to reach that goal? Are we, as senior level department heads, senior level officers of government, have to follow that mantra of being rich Black Christians? But that's where we sort of skewed as well, because I think there was good debate when the Christian bill was in the Constitution was being passed, and I think it's just something that it was good debate from certain individuals. Like Governor Motovell from West New Britain provided a good opinion, Governor Baird as well. But the majority of those in government just kept quiet because they knew it was a bill that the Prime Minister wanted to be passed. But the debate that came out of it was very strong, that this is, intrinsically changing the country's DNA, which you would argue it was already there, but by placing it within the Constitution is something very different, and it drew the criticism by Dr. John Mommis and senior leaders like Sir Julius Chan while he was still alive. So I think it's something that James Marape, as the person, wants to see driven, and because it is his agenda, he's the Prime Minister, it goes. And as we know in our politics, it's whatever the Prime Minister says, it goes. And it rarely gets challenged to a proportionate effect.
Just wanting to pivot into the domain of senior officials that would manage this relationship in the politics space and also in that policy priority space. And one central figure that is always the shadow of the Prime Minister is the Chief Secretary. I remember when conversations I've had with the first Chief Sec, Sir Robert Igara, how he would regularly inform us that when, literally speaking, when shit hits the fan in Waigani, everyone would run away. And there'd be nobody literally in Waigani to put the lights on and work. So the motivation of a chief secretary is to be that effectively the chief operations officer to make sure that the public service is functional and moving. And different prime ministers have had different types of relationships with chief secretaries. Even chief secretaries have had different relationships with their boss. But one fundamental role that they've played is being the action officer for the PM. Both, again, depending on the PM, they take more roles in the political management of issues, or they take more roles in the policy side. I just want to put a spotlight on the policy management side. And Thierry, you and I had some poignant discussions about that. So when I look at the role of Ambassador Ivan Pomerlev now, it ranges from going to the press and asking, not asking, but indicating that it was a grave error to, name the building Somare when the Somare family did not give consent, all the way to coordinating, Indo-PACOM engagements in the Mulitaka landslide. And he does that probably, that is his weekly schedule, that massive variety that chief secs undertake. Again, I'm and then Martyn, you've obviously observed this firsthand, where this 200 billion kina is the big, ticket item. He PM has already got that political declaration that I think will be his legacy as a God-fearing Christian. Now it's about the Prime Minister of economic reform and all those sorts of things that he's wanting a legacy on. But this particular role that Chief Secretary does, and the way you've explained his current leadership space, fellas, is this the way to run the country?
Wow, that's a tough one. Ideally, if you had a population that had a certain view about what a Papua New Guinean government is and what it should do, what the roles of different the parts of the government are, and what they should do, if people were driven by a political philosophy or political ideology, or a sense of right and left, or communism or capitalism, you know what I'm talking about. Like, let me give you an example. What's the role of members of parliament? Are they policy makers, legislators, or are they project implementers? So I'm just saying this because then you would have a chief secretary who have a certain, what is the role of a chief secretary within a Westminster democracy?
So let me just jump in for a couple of seconds there. If we put ideology aside, we put PNG, ecosystem aside. Let's purely look at it from a management point of view. Okay, lots of little papers coming in the in tray of your boss. Your boss basically gets it and gives it to the action officer. Now, at what point is the management model designed to identify all those requests that are going in? I guess that's my question, Martyn. What is the management style? And we're talking about a massive, organization here, Papua New Guinea as a nation state.
I guess I was trying to start from a big picture perspective because I've never worked at the Prime Minister's department and I do not know why A leads to B or A leads to C. So I wouldn't be able to say this happens because of this context within PNG. But from the outside, I can just make a comment. I think it goes back to our earlier discussion of the personality of the Prime Minister. So Thierry gave a perspective on how O'Neill was perceived and how you can see in the way that Chief Secretary functioned within that time. It was pretty what's the word, that you could see the power that this Chief Secretary wielded within the O'Neill period, and it's a really big contrast with how the power is being wielded from the Chief Secretary's office. I think within this, you can see the Prime Minister's personality of being very accommodating in the way it's reflected in the way the Chief Secretary behaves. And those who have interacted at this high level will understand what I'm talking about. It's a very big contrast. So I think the way the Chief Secretary's office functions, as you rightfully pointed out, is a shadow of the Prime Minister. So the Chief Secretary's behavior responds to the Prime Minister's personality and how accommodative the Prime Minister may be, or how forceful or instructive a Prime Minister may be. And you can see the level of decisiveness or indecisiveness in the way things are as well. I think that's how much I can comment. The Chief Secretary's office, in a way, reflects the personality of the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think Martyn just mentioned compared to the previous Chief Secretary, which was Isaac Lupari, Lupari was a very perceived as a powerful figure within O'Neill's government, and even had more abilities to be influential within government than certain ministers, and I think that's what some of the complaints were at the end for Peter O'Neill. And you would almost have this you'd see from the outside looking in that Isaac Lupari is on par with other senior cabinet members. But then compared to now, you have a very backroom operator like Ivan Pomaliu who just goes ahead with what is commanded and tasked of him. And in comparison, I can see that the Chief Secretary is really managing all the things that sporadically come up that the Prime Minister wants attention to. So, and it's probably a really difficult job for him because in politics, anything can be an issue. And if the Prime Minister says, I want this to be taken care of, he's the only person to deviate and give those instructions to. So you can see that now, compared to other prime ministers, James Marape wants to tackle the big ticket items, and he wants to take care of things himself regarding politics and manage those separately from his department. So I think that when you go to the Department of PM and NEC, that's Ivan Pomaliu's domain, but he has to take care of things that are unofficially sanctioned, like we just discussed earlier, the issue of grey listing. That's now his job to look after. He has to look after the reimbursement of funds to the Black Wednesday businesses. He has to look after the audit into Connect PNG. That's things that aren't really stipulated in his role. But he has to do it nonetheless because it was a direct instruction. So, and that's where I think draws problem for our public service, because it's very ad hoc at the moment, especially when it comes into the sphere of what the Prime Minister is interested in, right? So if, like tomorrow, if James Marape wakes up and says, I'm interested in seeking trade relations with Europe, it'll be Ivan Pomaliu's job to go and send a delegation to go and investigate that. So at the end of the day, I think it's ad hoc. It's very operating as is basis. So that's where it draws this comparison to a very dysfunctional company, if you'd like.
So probably just to end our session here, he's got 2 more years until he matches his greatest adversary.
Yep.
He's got some wins in terms of and again we can unpack this in the next episode. The FX shortage that's haunted us for 10 years, for the first time it balanced off, in a market sense, not a intervention sense. 7-8 days ago, we got some strong booming prices on our key commodities: coffee, copra, cocoa, and the gold, of course. Gas, oil prices are, relatively stable. So there's a larger question, is this Marape's manifesto that's manifesting this, or is it a signs of interconnected, globalized world that's providing these results? But there's one thing that has haunted him since 2019, and that's obviously on law and order. So he's got 2 more years. Just to close off, what do you think should be his number 1 priority for the next 24 months?
Well, it's a nice summary you brought about the global context and PNG and where we headed. On your point about, is it what we're seeing Marape's manifesto, or just product of things happening around the world? Well, I'll put it this way: it's when things are bad, people want to blame the government, and when things get good, they want to give the credit elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't have it both ways. And I don't think even it's a question of you can't have it both ways. I think there is a contribution from within as well. Maybe we contribute to some of the bad, but you can't just say that things have improved because of what's happened outside. Definitely the foreign exchange backlog would still be here, and the market definitely would not be able to manage it without the central bank intervention that has happened, for the past 3 years, because the central bank intervention had to clear much of the backlog such that now that the market is able to get foreign currency in, it doesn't have a huge backlog to clear out. So part of the reason why we're seeing a balancing out. Not part, but I would give credit to this government. Obviously, I work with the government, so take that with a pinch of salt. But I would give a lot of credit to this government for intervening in the foreign exchange market to clear out much of the backlog, such as now that we have the inflows that are coming in. The inflows that are coming in don't have to clear out a huge backlog.
Sure.
But in terms of Prime Minister Marape, it's wrong to compare him in a sense with the 8 years of O'Neill, because he has had to deal with COVID-19, which shut down the government, shut down the economy. So you would, have to take that into consideration as something that hindered a lot of what he had to do. And of course, the disruptions in the global supply chains that were further compounded by the Russia-Ukraine war. Those are real things that happened that had an impact on us. And they got, with COVID-19, for instance, a lot of people talked down the government, but the government had an option. You have your revenues being impacted by COVID. Do you cut your budget? Which is, but the government decided it would protect the budget. And protecting the budget meant, of course, everyone's hatred with now. But you had to borrow to protect the budget, so you don't have to cut your budget.
We'll
So where do
definitely-
we go now?
Yeah. Number one priority,
Um,
next 24 months.
Well, we're seeing, for instance, the foreign exchange balancing itself out. I think there's a lot of pressure for the bringing on the extractive industry projects.
Mhm.
My personal perspective on it is the government has shown that it can manage the non-resource economy and grow revenues without new resource projects. It should not rush into anything that would be a bad deal for this country. We've already had so many experiences with resource projects on that. Having said that, it would be good to have some of those resource projects come on board to add more economic stimulus to what the non-resource sector is currently. If I'm talking about one thing, I'd get some of those projects to FID, final investment decision, construction phase.
Yeah.
Get the PNG economy going, provide jobs for people and all of that
Yeah.
from the construction phase. So I would say focus on getting the resource projects going, given all the caveats that I've given about resource
Sure.
projects.
Sure. Thierry, next.
I'd say his number one priority should be to show the same level of interest that he does in intervening in a lot of things like resource negotiations and other issues into the preparation for the elections. I think if he wants to leave a positive, lasting legacy for the country, it needs to be leaving a functioning and safe and fair election. Because the election in 2022 under his leadership was probably one of the worst in history, and we are still yet to grapple major issues in his backyard in the Upper Highlands with guns and law and order. And that is something that he has the ability and the command to do, to intervene as he does and ensure that there is a good election outcome that reflects the people's choice. By that time, he would have the same number of years as Peter O'Neill, and just unmatched, just yet to match Michael Somare. So I think he should be more accommodating to the fact that he needs to provide a good avenue for for democracy to flourish. And I think in terms of the recent headways that we've had in the country, we're very at the whim of the international markets. And he's very lucky in terms of how we've been able to capitalize on high cocoa prices, high gold prices, and high coffee prices. Whereas if that was not the case, we would be in a very dire situation. So he shouldn't pick and choose with the successes of things out of his control and say that that is a direct result of his government's intervention. That would come if his government's intervention does capitalize on these record highs. So formalize the informal economy, make it more accessible for rural people to do banking, to bank their money, to put it back into the formal economy and things like that. And as Martyn said, we've shown our ability to flourish without an over reliance on the resource sector, through the non-resource sector. So I think yes, he should also step back from the negotiating table, because there are people who can negotiate things like that on our behalf. That's what they're employed to do. And he should worry about ensuring that there is a good outcome in 2027 for the country, because I think that will really hinge on how he would want his legacy to be and how the direction of the country would be.
Right, gentlemen. Thank you.